forgive me for this trap shit. Sergeant Smack make it backflip. Telly Hank did with the action. With the vital speaking Spanish. Frank Matthews, how I vanish. Poof. Came back like I'm King Tut. Gold BBS is on a beamer. When Fat Cat was 10 queens up. Ball off the profit, not the re-up. Fly like Puerto Rican Jesus. Uptown like I'm Baby May. Just caught a touchdown from the bay.
In 1987, two respectable heavyweights would meet up in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas is ecstatic about hosting this fight. Expected tourism could generate $300 million in revenue for the city. But the numbers that gamblers are really looking at are the odds on the two fighters and how they were established. In early March, Marvin Hagler was the favorite.
On August 6, 1987, though Mike Tyson was running around knocking motherfuckers out, it would be Marvelous Marvin Hagler with a 62-2 record with 2 draws and 52 knockouts, defending his championship against Sugar Ray Leonard, who had a 33-1 record, that would meet in Caesar's Palace for what was called the Fight of the Year, dubbed the Super Fight.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, from Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, let's get ready to rumble. This is the main event of the evening, the Super Fight. 12 rounds for the middleweight championship of the world. Introducing first, the challenger. In 34 bouts as a professional, he has won 33-24 by KO. He's 30 years old, from Palmer Park, Maryland, one of the most charismatic figures ever to step into a boxing ring. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenger, Sugar Ray Leonard. And now introducing the champion. 12 straight times he's successfully defended his title. In 66 professional bouts, he has won 62 of them, 52 by KO. At 32 years of age, he stands 5'8", from Brockton, Massachusetts. Ladies and gentlemen, the middleweight champion of the world, Marvelous Marvin Hagler.
In a fight where his opponent was favored 3-1, the underdog, Sugar Ray Leonard, would go on to defeat the champion in a 12-round decision. But the two heavyweights that was meeting up weren't in the ring. They were in the crowd watching. And from the year that they would meet up in 1987 up until 1989, Rafer would sell thousands of kilos, taking control of over 30% of Washington, D.C.'s drug market. The United States government would contest that it would be this meeting that would take the notorious D.C. cocaine kingpin to the next level. During the process, he would bring more money, murder, and mayhem to the city while flooding it with work.
Well, the prices has come down, moderately. Say it was about $50 to $45 before. Now it's between $40 and $35. You can get stronger dope for $40 to $35 than you could for $45 and $50 before,
And when I tell you it was mayhem, we talking on an epidemic type level.
The violence has drawn increasing attention from members of Congress who make Washington their home. At a recent hearing, U.S. senators voiced their impatience with the city's efforts to stem the drug murders.
You can't have people killed and blood running in the streets of the city like it was some third world capital run by a despot.
Similarly, the Bush administration has focused on the city's drug problem. Last month, Drug Policy Director William Bennett considered a plan to take federal control of the city police department. For nearly 18 months, the drug-related death toll in and around Washington has risen steadily. In the city alone, 135 people were murdered since the start of the year. Local officials say 80% of the killings arose from disputes in the city's drug trade.
Public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Though President Nixon would wage war on drug use almost a decade prior, it would be Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy who would take it to the next level. A lot of people talk about Reaganomics or the Reagan era, but it would be during his administration where they would take down some of the biggest players to ever play the game. And little did Melvin or Rayful know, but just 2 years after meeting in Caesar's Palace, they would be involved in one of the biggest and wildest drug trials the nation has ever seen.
FBI. Right, okay. That's who's monitoring us. Huh? That's who's monitoring us now.
Jurors are under 24-hour guard. Their names are kept secret. The whole trial is conducted behind bulletproof glass. Defense attorneys complain.
It sends a message that the defendants are dangerous people from whom others need to be protected.
The so-called Rayful Edmond gang arriving for trial. Massive security all around the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C.
Hey, right there. I'm telling
for what the U.S. government claims is a case that illustrates how new and violent drug networks are springing up all over the country.
They're bringing death and destruction to children and to families and to entire communities.
The gang, allegedly led by 24-year-old Rayful Edmond, reportedly sold 1,700 pounds of cocaine a month, bought directly from the notorious Crips gang in Los Angeles.
Now with him being put out on Front Street like that, and the media painting the picture that he was the vehicle that allowed Rayful Edmonds to do the drive-by, now standing next to Rayful, any chance that he thought that he was going to get at an acquittal or even a fair sentence was out the window. And in an effort to make an example out of the group, in which they did, with one of his co-defendants, Tony Lewis Sr., saying years later after serving a lengthy prison sentence, pretty much after they seen what the government did to us, people stopped taking shit to trial. Tony, Rayful, as well as Melvin Butler will all receive elbows.
The verdict today in the Edmond drug ring trial in Washington, 24-year-old Rayful Edmond convicted of running a $2 million a week cocaine crime outfit in the nation's capital. The one-time schoolyard basketball star faces a mandatory life sentence now. 10 co-defendants, including friends and relatives, were found guilty on related charges. Security surrounding the trial was unusually tight. Names of the jurors were kept secret even from the judge and lawyers to guard against possible reprisals.
Before he would receive his life sentence, Melvin Butler would say, "I'm sorry for the hurt that I caused the District of Columbia and in Los Angeles." Reading from a statement that he had written just days earlier, he would say that it was only then that he realized that he was facing a life sentence. And if he had to do it all again, he would have taken a different route and pursued a basketball scholarship with Ohio State University. Yo, what up though? Shay's Popalot. Salute the almighty MOBB. This story starts in Cali, but it got a lot of interstate trafficking activity, and it's going to have a lot of repercussions in the district. Now, today we're going to talk about somebody that's really spoken of, and a person that is probably most responsible, if not second to Tony Lewis, to one of the biggest drug kingpins turned informants that the game has ever seen. And that person would be Melvin Butler. Now, Melvin Butler, who is widely documented as a Crip, and if most people know him, it's due to his association with Rayful Edmonds. But I'm going to tell y'all about a chance meeting one night in 1987 and how in 3 years it would result in Melvin Butler serving a life sentence. Now, living in and covering the streets for damn near my whole life, it is my wholehearted belief that no sport has had an effect on the game as much as boxing. Whether you look at it like if one of the greats, Mike Tyson, wasn't a boxer, we'd probably be covering him on Mob Ties as much as we mention him. Or we can go back to the infamous event in the 70s when Frank Lucas would be spotted at a boxing match wearing a chinchilla and a chinchilla hat that would allegedly put him on the radar of the federal government. We could look at a situation in Detroit where Hollywood cop Gil Hill, who starred in Beverly Hills Cop with Eddie Murphy, was alleged to be a part of some kind of cover-up involving the Kerry brothers over boxing tickets that they didn't receive? Or better yet, we could look at this situation in the night of April 6, 1987, at what at the time was considered the fight of the century between Marvelous Marvin and Sugar Ray, where Melvin Butler would describe first meeting Rayful Edmonds and Tony Lewis at a nightclub in the Hilton Hotel. He wouldn't go into detail about how the two then strangers would become close enough to be entangled in a drug conspiracy, but it is my assertion that that is where boxing and its connection to the streets or the game comes into play. Because something that young people too young to know, and maybe even a situation where older people are too old to remember, but at one time, preferably the 1980s and even probably the 1970s, boxing was the sport of choice, especially for figures in the streets. You have to think about the NBA, though as big as it is now, it was not as big before even Michael Jordan. It was stars like Larry Bird and Magic and Isaiah. And the NBA, not to say that it wasn't relevant, it just didn't have the star power that boxing had at the time. Definitely not before Magic, Bird, Isaiah, and Jordan specifically. And though boxing, considered by some now to be a dead sport, with a lot of people preferring almost UFC over boxing. But in the 1980s, that wasn't the case, and boxing had probably the biggest names in all of sports, with one person in particular, Muhammad Ali, who would dominate the sport the decade prior. And though he would retire in 1980 and 81 after coming out of retirement and losing to Trevor Berbick in 1981, but then the sport would see the rise of guys like Tommy Hitman Hearns, who some of us remember beating up Martin in that Martin episode, and Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray, and none other than Iron Mike Tyson. And it wasn't only lawyers and doctors and executives in them stands watching them fight. It was people that was getting money in the streets. And a lot of times they would be there on business. And that's exactly how I'm going to assume that Melvin Butler and Rayful Edmonds would cross paths. You could almost look at it as a room of high rollers where somebodies are recognizing somebodies. And it would be a conversation that they would have that night that would lead to them playing basketball at a local YMCA in Vegas. And we could also look at the love that the two had for basketball. Maybe it could have been a conversation about that. As like I said, Melvin Butler was good enough to attain a basketball scholarship to D1 Ohio State University. And if anybody knows anything about Rayful Edmonds, definitely in the early days before hustling, they would talk about him playing basketball and even possibly attending the legendary Dunbar High School. And we could even go further to his connection to the Georgetown basketball team, but I'm going to leave it at that. But it would be at that pickup game at the local YMCA where afterwards, where Melvin Butler would explain the seeds that would grow to one of the biggest drug conspiracies in history. He said it would be there where he would be propositioned by Rayful Edmonds to arrange a couple shipments for him. At the time, Butler would describe it as 2 shipments, each of 5 kilograms of cocaine. Probably thrown off and didn't know if Rayful was maybe a fed, he would tell Rayful that he would have to talk about it. Now, I'm not quite sure what gave Rayful the idea that Melvin Butler was capable of handling that type of order, but he definitely was, as he was said to have a close connection to Brian Waterhead Bo Bennett, with some media outlets even describing a relationship between the two as Melvin Butler working as some kind of liaison to Bo Bennett, who happened to have a connection to one of the biggest cartels bringing work into the States. They would pretty much paint Melvin Butler as a person that was just said to find connects for Bo Bennett and in Rayful Edmonds. And in Rayful Edmonds, he would find that in an outlet to D.C. Melvin Butler would explain at his sentencing that after the proposition from Rayful Edmonds back in April of '87 for 2 months, it would be no contact. But he would say out of nowhere, Rayful would give him a call, asking him if he was ready. He would reply that he wasn't at the time, but would invite Rayful to a party in Cali on June 28, 1987. And something that was supposed to just start out as 2 5-kilo deals would grow substantially. As of the top of the very next year, January of 1988, authorities would speak of a trip that Rayful Edmonds and 6 others would take to Los Angeles. They would explain a situation where the group would run up a $2,300 tab at the Stouffer's Concourse Hotel, using it almost as substantial evidence, explaining that Rayful would pay the bill in cash, while also saying 6 weeks later, at around mid-February 1988, the group would return again and stay at that same hotel where Rayful would pay $3,000 in cash for that stay. The affidavit would state that during both trips, Rayful Edmonds would meet with Melvin Butler, saying that even on the second trip that the two would grow so close that even though Rayful Edmonds paid a $3,000 hotel bill, he didn't stay at the hotel. He stayed at Melvin Butler's apartment in Wilmington, California. And it would be during that specific trip in February of '88 where Melvin Butler would admit to helping Rayful Edmonds set up a 200-kilogram deal. Now, let me explain to y'all something. Money is a hell of a thing. It can turn family and friends to enemies. It can turn enemies into friends. And it can turn strangers into both. And if you want to know how close Melvin Butler and Rayful Edmonds would end up becoming, during that same month of February 1988, when Melvin Butler would set up that 200-kilogram deal, that would be the same month where Rayful Edmonds would go on that epic $50,000 cash shopping spree, pretty much shutting down Georgetown. Well, according to the Washington Post, Melvin Butler was right there with him. The group would end up getting so big that later in the year, in April of 1988, a person only described as a Los Angeles drug dealer was in the process of trying to buy another 200 kilograms for Rayful. But unfortunately for him, the person he was trying to make the purchase from just happened to be an undercover deputy sheriff. Authorities would obtain a search warrant for the man's home and end up seizing nearly $2 million, the equivalent of $5.3 million today. A short time later, the same dealer would contact the same undercover officer and explain that his money had been seized by authorities. But he, on behalf of Rayful Edmonds, still needed those 200 keys. Melvin Butler, Tony Lewis Sr., and Rayful Edmonds would each receive life sentences for their parts in the conspiracy. Just years later, in 1990, after serving decades of his life, he would end up being released in the mid-2010s, sometime around 2015-16. Now, if any of y'all happen to cross paths with Melvin Butler, buy him a bottle of Douce on behalf of the mob. Y'all hit me on IG with your Cash App. I'll send you the money. Y'all let him know we send out well wishes, and the mob would love to have a sit down with him. And y'all definitely get in the comment box if y'all want to have an argument about if boxing was the sport of choice for hustlers in the 1980s, because I'm here for it. And if y'all still tuned in this video this long, I'm definitely thinking about going live on New Year's Eve. And if that's something y'all want to see and be a part of, y'all get in the comment box and let me know so we can make it happen. Y'all make sure y'all hit the red bell and subscribe button right under this video so y'all know when this real trill spill shit is dropping. Y'all let me know what stories we need to tell, what we missed, what we got wrong, all of that going into the new year. Y'all let me know what y'all trying to see, what we need to cover. And y'all tap in directly, Instagram, Twitter, POP_A_LOT. And until the next shakedown, y'all know the play. It's your ace Popalot. Salute the almighty mob.